Right. So wheels, tires, and hubs. Very crucial component. Has anybody ever seen a tire come off or a wheel come off on the highway?
I
I've
didn't.
replaced them.
I didn't see one come off, but I heard of a guy I used to work with. The axle came right out while he was driving.
An axle came. Wow. Like, yeah, there's all kinds of reasons why you want to make sure you are servicing these correctly. Now, who out there is going to be servicing wheels and tires?
Me.
You. Do you still do
Everybody.
that?
Yep.
You still are swapping rubbers on rims?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
Shop I was at used to do that too.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm surprised. Typically, one of you already said it all once in one of the ILMs we were talking about. You get Cal Tire to do it. And I'd be willing to wager that the large portion of you are probably getting a tire shop to do the tires. Because again,
Ryan does ours.
who's that?
Ryan does my tires. Our tires at GDA, or he did.
Oh, he did, yeah. Right on. So you get a professional tire technician to do those. It's not a very fun job. Right, Ryan?
It definitely has its moments,
Yeah.
but like shops that have wheelers don't like doing tires on wheelers, so they get guys that do to do them, and they're hard.
Oh yeah, they are. Yeah, wheelers are that's their own beast. And for those of you who don't know what a wheeler is, you will by the end of this week for sure, or next week for sure, if not this week.
I'm
So
really strong though from it.
you really, yeah. This job line of work that we're in is a really good workout. You definitely get paid to work out all day long. So you can get in really good shape if you work properly and smart, right? So what are we going to be talking about in this? When you're done here, we need to know about servicing wheels, tires, and hubs. The most important one for us, chances are what all of you for sure are going to be able to fix one day, is hubs. So that's going to be the bearings and the lubricant, the rolling elements inside of the wheels, or that makes the wheels go around. Typically, we're going to be fixing these because they leak, and they leak on the brakes. So that is one of the large problems when it comes to the hubs and wheel ends. Changing tires, wheels and tires, I'll be honest with you, I've never done it on heavy duty. I've watched lots of people do it, and I'm glad I never had to. We used to change tires on our cars and pickup trucks on smaller handheld machines, and that was difficult on its own. So yeah, in my experience, I just would hire somebody to do the tires, to swap rubber on rims for me. But we do need to know a few things about tires and wheels, types and designs, how they're made, and how they're installed. So are you all still seeing spoke wheels out there?
Yes.
Yes, they are still in existence. It's an older technology. And we have 4 wheel ends in the shop that are spoke wheels. So we will get to have a look at them. This particular one looks to me like it is a steer axle spoke with, does anyone know what this kind of rim is called?
It's a split wheel.
Not the Dayton, no, but and that's more terming when you're talking about the hub design, and it is when we're talking about this rim, I think what I heard somebody say is,
It's a 3-piece tube type split wheel.
yeah, it's a split wheel. That's what I'm looking for. And I think that's Ryan who's talking, the tire expert. Are these safe to work with if you don't know what you're doing?
No.
No, they are absolutely not. So you have to know how to work this multi-piece rim, because otherwise it can come apart very, very rapidly on you. Okay. And we'll talk about multi-piece rims some more. So here's a dual spoke wheel. When we get into the shop, we'll look at how we mount these and demount them. Now, typically, the idea behind spoke wheels was that you don't unmount them from the hub. I wouldn't take this rim off of this hub unless I was changing the, unless I needed to service the tire itself, essentially. You don't gain anything. So it's a little hard to tell on this picture, but this, so this brake drum, rather than going on and being piloted by the hub and then having the rims placed on a flange after it, this brake drum is actually bolted to the back of this hub. So you gain nothing by removing the wheels. If you needed to change brakes on an assembly like this or this one, all you would have to end up removing the hub anyway. So you'd be pulling the drive axle out and then taking bearings off, pulling the wheel seal, pull the whole hub, and that's how you change brakes. Because this one as well, this drive axle right here is bolted to the drum. So you have to remove all of the hub assembly in order to change the brakes anyhow. So my advice to you is, if you see this, unless you're doing the wheels, unless you need to change wheels for whatever reason, don't take them off of the hub. There's no reason to. This is where you'd use a pallet jack or a special dolly 4 dualies to pull off with the hub assembly, all as one piece, and then you can service the brakes and the drum. There is a few different types of spacers. This determines the space in between the 2 dualies. Okay, so it will ride right in here. I'm going to make a red mark on it. So you'd have your 2 rims on here, and you'd have a spacer right in here. This will hold the space between the 2. Okay, there's specific thickness and design, a few different versions of them here. This is probably more common what we see. Disc wheels. Why do we call them a disc? Because there is a piece of the rim that is shaped like a disc that holds the rest in place. So they're 2 pieces permanently attached together, usually welded at the factory. So you can still get split rims or multi-piece rims with a locking ring that have a disc mounting. And typically, like the spoke wheel and the split rim are older technologies that we've tried to go away from. And now if you have disc wheels, typically it's not going to be a split rim like that. It'll be a tubeless, like what we're more commonly used to. These can be made with steel or aluminum. If it's aluminum, the material is significantly thicker than if it's steel, so you need to make sure you have the right studs. You can't, if you had a steel rim, steel dually rims, and you change it to aluminum without changing to longer studs, you're going to find you don't have proper thread engagement. You won't have long enough threads on the stud to actually fasten it in properly.
You also have to be concerned about the ears on the hub that hold the center board.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you do have to make sure the pilot is correct, and absolutely. So talking about studs more, there's different types of ways we pilot, and we're going to get into that, the ears that he's talking about as well. This is a lot more typical when it comes to, I found, medium and lighter duty applications. And so this is a tapered nut with a stud. So what we do here is we use the tapered portion to hold in the rim. What you'll have on the rim, where's the good picture of it? Here it is. What you have on the rim, I'll just draw one. So the rim, rather than being a flat surface like this with the hole bored through it for the stud, it will end up having the opposite taper in it. Sort of like that. And that's where the flange here, this taper in this nut, is going to hold the rim in alignment. That is what this is supposed to do. So if you put the wrong nuts on here or put them on the wrong way, you'll end up having a gap inside of here. Now, these ones have a lot more play in the bore for the stud in the rim, and that's because they're relying on this taper to hold it in alignment, and so they need to have that movement inside of that bore. The place where we will typically see these on heavy equipment is when it comes to a double nut. So who has seen the double nut assembly for a dual? So you have an inner and an outer. We can definitely look at those in the shop as well.
Our plow truck has those on it.
It does? Good. Excellent. So here is what we're using. But Ryan, I believe, was mentioning as well. So it's called a hub piloted dual wheel. So small picture. Our rim right here, the images of or the rim itself are riding on the hub. The center bore of the rim and those ears on the hub are what are aligning it to be circular, right? The rim has to be a perfect circle around the hub, because otherwise it's going to be off balance and you're going to have a hop when you're driving down the road. Okay. In this instance, all the nuts do is provide a clamping force. Okay. It's up to the hub itself and the bore and the rim in order to pilot the wheel and hold it in alignment. Okay. This is what we are probably used to seeing, and this is what's going to be on the hub piloted style. We're going to have a flange and then a nut. These have to turn independently from each other. Okay, they have to, so that we can reduce the friction enough and get proper clamping force. It's also recommended that we put a drop of oil in between these two moving bodies, so they are supposed to move and they're not supposed to be broken. They can't, if it comes apart in your hand, wheel nut is garbage and you need to get another one. Different ways we can incorrectly install these. So here is the better pictures of this. How these get installed incorrectly. So we have a hub piloted wheel, which is correctly resting on the hub. Now we've put one flanged cone nut on one side, so it is clamping here. The stud piloted wheel is not going to be piloted correctly. It is not resting on the hub. And here we have two stud piloted wheels. So these should have those tapered cone nuts inside of them, and they don't. So what we would end up having with this, as soon as it would drive over a very large bump, it would start shifting these two rims would shift back and forth, bouncing up and down, however much play they would have in the bores of those where the studs go. Our typical hub designs for us. So this is what a steer axle most likely would look like. We're going to mostly worry about larger drive axles or trailer axles. That's what we're usually talking about. So it doesn't make it super clear in this image what is what. But the bearings, when we talk about adjusting them, so our adjuster nut, bearing here, bearing here. This is the cavity that would be full of oil.
And a spacer maybe.
Yeah, and that spacer we were talking about yesterday would sit between this race and this race, and it would look like a cone, just like that. Okay, so this is that spacer that we were talking about. This is where your hubcap bolts are. So the bolts I say you break very often, these are the hubcap bolts, because they do make these hubs that are aluminum. And then if you start using steel, or well, you're going to be using steel bolts in the aluminum hub with an aluminum hubcap, it makes a lot of corrosion, and you can break bolts fairly easily. If you work on this, that's what this looks like. There might be gears inside of there, a face seal, all different kinds of things. I have no idea. And that's all we talk about off-road equipment.
Just a quick little spurt, hey?
Pretty much, yep. I did very little work on off-road equipment. So if you, if any of you do work on that, you have a lot more experience on it than I do. I did on-highway stuff pretty much my entire career.
I've done loaders, and that's pretty much it.
I've never done like a final drive, you know, like I've done work on them, but never pulling this wheel end off and fixing whatever is inside of there. So now, I mean, if I was given the parts at a manual and tools, could I? Absolutely. Any of us will be able to do that by the end, right? So
I've welded lugs on tracks and changed tires on lots of different types of equipment, but that's the only off-road stuff I've ever done.
gotcha. Well, I mean, that's even more than I've done. I changed some hoses, some hydraulic rams, topped up some things, and changed the odd component.
That's the thing too.
I've installed a couple scales on loaders. So like pressure reading scales that read how the hydraulic pressure in the rams, and then based on that, determine how much weight is in each bucket load. That's about it. So tires, tire construction, care, maintenance in relation to design. So tires are a lot more in depth than you think, and there is a lot of words we want to try to remember with some key ones. So this tire, solid tire, completely solid rubber. I wouldn't want to take this one outside, designed for indoor use. Remember, we talked about that with forklifts a bit. Tube type tires. So if you see a split rim, as you can see, this is what we call a split rim. It's going to be a tube tire. It's what they're going to have in a split rim. Okay. And we will talk, I'll show you probably a video that has split rims coming apart in it. This is going to be the more typical what we see nowadays. tubeless tire, disc rim. That's most common out there. Hey Ryan, are you allowed to have split rims on on-highway vehicles?
Yes, you sure are. In fact, many school buses still have 10, 120s today.
I was gonna say the only place I've ever seen it is school buses. So
Well, if you had been around, say, in like the logging in Kelowna and that area, a lot of those tractors out there still have tube type tires. It's just, it's an application thing. The Dayton wheels with tube type wheels, they're actually, you can take them apart quicker. Like you can get the wheels off quicker and put them back on. And you don't need heavy duty 1-inch impacts to change tires out in the bush. You can do it with a breaker bar. So that's where the advantage comes from them.
and when you talk, you just said a word there, and someone else had said it too. What do you mean by a Dayton?
So Dayton is a company that has the monopoly on producing the components of the demountable wheels design. There's very few other companies that build parts for that, and Dayton is the company that does it. So Dayton wheels are demountable hubs with the clamp style.
So those are the spoke wheels you're talking about, right?
Yes.
Yes. So what they call these Daytons, whoever said it was absolutely right. That's it's like the Kleenex brand name. So Kleenex is a brand of tissue paper. Dayton is a brand of spoke wheel, and essentially they have a monopoly on it, and good for them. I mean, most people aren't necessarily going with these. Now, this is called a bud wheel, is what people term it, like these. If you see spoke wheels, or not spoke wheels, sorry, split rims out in industry, unless you're trained properly, you're not going to be doing it. And you need a cage, you need to know what you're doing before you can play with these. And what you learned here isn't going to be enough to work with spoke, or I keep saying spoke, split rims. It's not going to be sufficient. So chances are it's not a surprise either for you. If you have them wherever you work, you know about it. It's something that's common knowledge, because they can be dangerous if you do not know what you're doing. If you know what they're doing, they're perfectly fine. They have been used for a long time. So different tread design. So they call this a rib. You can see it's continuous ribs going around, and block design's a bit more aggressive. So sometimes they're directional. Okay. One of the big jokes to tell people is that someone accidentally put the left wheels on the right and the right wheels on the left. Sometimes that is the case, right? Different off-road tires. I've never changed one of these. And this is probably what you've done a lot, Ryan, hey?
Yeah, mostly split wheel stuff, like that one on the left there that is a single piece wheel, and those are really hard to change by hand.
Mm-hmm.
The tractor tire is a lot thinner, so it is actually a lot easier to change.
Oh,
and then that floater tire you'd need a machine to do usually, or a picker truck.
Gotcha. So another interesting things about these tires, you might know this, Ryan. How much does any one of these tires cost?
They start, that one on the left there is probably somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000. The one in the middle they start at $2,500, and then those tractor tires are anywhere from $1,100 to $2,200.
Right, and those tires, maybe that's about as tall as us, hey? About that big.
It's hard to say with the tractor tire, because that they're a lot taller. So I don't know what kind of an implement that's on, but if it's on a sprayer, that's probably a 48-inch wheel.
Yeah, so 4 feet, right? 4 feet from here to here. Now, when you get into the really big mine equipment and stuff that's out there, like up in Fort McMurray, and some of the different areas way up in the Arctic and stuff like that, those tires end up becoming very, very large and very, very expensive. And an interesting business that I've seen popping up is actually tire repair on those really large, expensive tires. So
I wonder how they build those things. Like, boy, you shop just to melt those down and create them is be ridiculous.
if you ever get a chance to ever go see what manufacturing looks like in person, go see it, because there isn't anything comparable even to talk about what it is. Like I've been to a trailer manufacturing shop in Kansas, and the plant, the factory itself, the building was as big as Fairview campus is. Like, it was massive. You needed a vehicle to get around the building, and they're building trailers in there. And yeah, the scale of things, it's not something you're used to up here. We don't see anything that big. So same thing with where they're making these. Like, we'd be in awe for a bit, and everyone else who works there just thinks it's normal. But yeah, it's very impressive how large the production facilities can be. So yeah, these are just different types of treads you're going to use in off-road applications. So what you might see on a construction site, these are going to be used to try and minimize the road or the ground pressure you're putting down, and then just for good traction in nice mud, like you said, a tractor tire. Different types of construction. So bias ply tires, they have, where's the good picture of it? So here's an excellent picture of a bias ply tire. So the ply starts here, wraps all the way around, and then continues on to the other side. They end up with cords that go opposite each other, okay? Bias ply tires have a bit of a downfall. They like to wiggle around, okay? As they wiggle around, they become unstable. So it's essentially, because of this sidewall, the way this is designed here, there's a lot of flex in there, and they can just wiggle around. They're not very common for on-highway use anymore because of that. Most of what we're going to see are radial ply tires. So here you're going to have this tire casing that's holding up your sidewalls, and then these reinforcing belts along the tread. So instead of looking like that last one where the whole tire is one big even balloon, we end up with a tire that looks a bit different. So we have the plies of the sidewall here and the belts here to actually hold the tread stable on the road. So it's too wiggly around in the tread here because the whole tire flexes, and it all flexes together. In a radial ply tire, as the sidewall flexes, the belts don't have to because they're separate. Another advantage with these is typically they can be retreaded, typically. So, and the stability. So now, because of the belts, we have that excellent road holding capability and increased stability. So that's why we use radial ply tires more typically. Always follow manufacturers' recommendations. If they use bias ply tires on wherever implement on highway or off-road, make sure you're putting the right one on there. Make sure the correct one was put on to begin with, right? They might be, we have to determine why a failure happened. So if a failure happened because of incorrect tires, we need to make sure we're putting the correct one on. Retreading tires, it's an interesting process to watch. So if you're interested in it, I would go watch how it works. Essentially, it's treating the rubber. You're removing all the old tread. They treat the rubber, and then you're going to be gluing back new tread back on. It's sometimes call it vulcanizing. So you're heating it up with chemicals to try and melt it and make it all one piece again. So did you do any retreading or see any of it done, Ryan?
So when you work at a company like Cal Tire, you go in and you sit there for about 16 hours and you do a bunch of training, and they do show a lot of the retreading part of it. So you get to learn what the different processes are called and what they're doing. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I did that orientation when I worked there.
Right on. So if it's going to be something you're going to end up doing, they'll give you training on it. It's not something that, it's not so common for just a trailer technician or a highway tractor technician to be working on and doing retreading. It would get a tire shop to do that. And a lot of times, probably instead of having somebody like here in Grand Prairie doing it, they might ship the tires off somewhere and have a place maybe in a larger center like Edmonton, where they have someone whose job it is, like an assembly line of people whose job it is to retread tires.
The only place in Grand Prairie that retreads tires in-house is Transport Tire.
Okay. Yeah, so the rest of them, if they think they can reuse the tires, they're shipping them off. So tire sizing. They use tire size that are marked on the side of the tire in imperial or metric. Basically, that's the bottom line. Go with the same size that's on there, unless you know why you're changing it and what you're changing it to. So I'm sure a whole bunch of you have picked up different size tires and rims and offsets and all this kind of good stuff for your pickup trucks, probably. I don't know, it's hard for me to say because I haven't seen everybody's truck vehicles yet. So, but with this kind of selection, when you're picking tires and wheels out for your industrial applications, you're probably not going to be changing it around too much for the reasons we do with our personal vehicles, right? So just go with the same size. And how we measure those, that's really nice. I'm not going to ask you any questions about that because it can get a little bit complicated when we start talking about all the different aspect ratios and the offsets and how we can determine the different sizes, and which one would go where. So this, however, can come into play. So once we do have our wheels mounted or a vehicle comes in and they're all the same, they're still all in good shape, we want to make sure that we actually are keeping the tires within a certain size on certain axles. So there is an allowable difference in size on one wheel end and on one axle, okay? We either have a 19 millimeter maximum circumference or a 6 millimeter difference in diameter. And you remember when you're talking with Clint about calculating areas and stuff like that, the difference between circumference and diameter, really, really important to remember. So circumference is the distance around a circle, diameter is from one end to the other, and the radius is from the middle to the end. Very important to remember those. Different methods of matching our dualies. I haven't seen too many people doing things like this, but there's a pretty good reason why we should. Does anyone know why? I guess two reasons. This is the first one. It's because the road is supposed to have road crown in it. So we talked about alignment a little bit. Is the roads on our highways perfectly flat. So we have the ditch here, the ditch here, and then this is the road. Right?
Forgot to put the potholes.
Except the potholes, yeah. So we forgot the potholes.
Can't forget the potholes, not in Alberta.
Now, ideally, what engineers tell us is that the road is actually designed with a hump in it. Just like this. They call it road ground. So if you're looking down the road, it should have a very, very slight top will be right in the middle where the center line is, and it should slope down on either side, from side to side to the ditch. So we're going to be aligning vehicles to fight against the road ground, because what would happen? So you're driving on the right side of the road. That's where we drive, single lane highway. And this is actually how the highway looks. It's tilted over to the right. So you have your dualies. Where is that going to vehicle want to go? Even if all of your angles are correct.
To the ditch.
It's going to try and constantly drive down that way. Okay. So we align things with a slight scrub angle or a slight thrust angle out of the ditch, just slightly. For any of you who've done alignments, you probably wondered when I was going to talk about that, because that's something that you typically do, is you put your thrust angle a little bit out of the ditch. And we'll talk about that when we do alignments. It's the same reason why we want to tire size correctly. If my tires were all the same size, all across the board, all the time, it wouldn't be an issue. Usually they're not.